Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking Math for Business and Finance and Math Applications. And we are finishing up the drill problems, the odd-numbered problems that were assigned in the digital study guide. In the last video, we had stopped on problem 13, so there is only one left that we have to do from that particular section, which is 15. However, this particular chapter, because of the difficulty of statistics, they've given actual optional assignments. So I will be doing the optional assignments for the drill problems and the word problems when we're doing the word problems. Okay, and if you noticed, you know, throughout the rest of the textbook, we never did a challenge problem, but yet in this chapter we are going to do a challenge problem. So, just be aware that when you're watching that last video, it went up to 13 and it looks like, oh, there's only, we're only going to do one more problem. But like I said, in this video, I'll do this one problem and work through the rest of the optional drill problems. And then when I'm doing the word problems, I'm going to work through those additional word problems also. Okay. All right. So let's get to it here. Okay. How many degrees on a circle would, all right, get rid of that. My typing on that one wasn't too good. Would be given the following, okay? So the wearing digital watches are 42%, wearing a traditional watch is 51%, wearing no watch is 7%. And it asks how many degrees on a circle graph. Well, when you have a circle graph, when you have a circle, that's 360 degrees, okay? So what we're doing here is we're chopping up that circle into 3 different sections. Here's a digital watch, here's a traditional watch, and here's a no watch. Okay, so what would be the number of degrees for each one of those options? Well, to do that, if I have, so here I have 42%, here I have 7%, and here I have 51%. And when you add all of those up, they equal 100%. All right, so this here, if you notice, this is no different than when we're going back into the earlier chapters in the book when we're talking about costs and percentages, having amounts and percentages. Okay, it's the same thing. I have 100% of something. Well, that 100% of something is chopped up into these 3 percentages, and even though I shouldn't have written percent there, that should be a degree. Okay, that's a degree there. So even though we're not talking about dollar amounts, right, we're talking about degrees, right? It's just no different. It's the same underlying concept, just applied to something else. So I'm going to take 42% of, well, actually, let me go backwards like that. I'm going to take 360 and multiply it by 0.42. That's 42% in decimal format. And that ends up being 151.2 degrees. So I take 360 times 0.51, or 51%, and that gives me 183.6 degrees. And then, of course, 360 times 0.07 ends up being 25.2 degrees. And of course, if you add these 3 up, that should total your 360 degrees. Okay. Right, so that's the end of that drill problem, and now let's move on to the optional problems. Okay, so it says here, calculate the range for the following set of data. Okay, so what's the range? Well, the range is the highest value minus the lowest value. So what's my highest value here? The highest value is 133. Ooh, that was a terrible looking 3. Right, 133. And what's my lowest one? That's this here, 50. Nope, not 52. It's 35. Minus 35. So that makes my range 133. That's 98. Okay. And the way I did that, real quick in my head, I mean, we're talking about 133 minus 35. I actually looked at it as 135, and the difference between 5 and 3 is 2. That's how I ended up, since that's 100 points there, subtract 2, I end up with 98. That's how I did that in my head. Okay. I didn't have to use a calculator, and I didn't have to go and write 133 less 35. That gives me 8, gives me 9. Okay, I didn't have to do that. What I did was said that 135 is almost 100 away from 133, and the difference between those two is 2 points. So instead of 100, I end up with 98. Okay. All right, number 2, next problem. Oh boy. Let's see here. Calculate the standard deviation for the following sample set of data. Round the final answers to the nearest tenth. Okay. So let's see here. Okay, so this is my data, right? And it will behoove you to, and I'm going to end up taking the rest of this here video working through this here standard deviation, okay? But it's going to behoove you to look at those illustrations like I did in the theory videos or that you have in the textbook, okay? Because that's how I'm going to present the data across here, my information across here. So this is my data, okay? And the first thing that I need to do is I need to calculate my mean, all right? So to calculate my mean, right, is equal to, all right, so I have to add all of these up. And let's see here, so I get 83.6, oops, 83.6 plus 92.3 plus 56.5 plus 43.8 plus 77.1 plus 66.7, and that totals 420. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6 points of data. So I divide the 420 by 6, and I get 70 as my mean. Okay, so my mean is 70, right? Just an average. Okay. So then in the next column, I have to take my data minus my mean in order to find the deviation of the data from the mean. So I take 83.6 and I subtract 70 from it, and that gives me 13.6. I take 92.3 minus 70, and that gives me 22.3. I take 56.5 minus the 70, and that gives me 13.5. I take 43.8, subtract 70, and that gives me 26.2. 77.1 minus 70, and that gives me that's a minus 13.5. Nope. No. Right, that's a minus 13.5, and that's a minus 26.2. Okay, and then 77.1 minus 70 is 7.1, and then 66.7 minus 70 is minus 3.3. Okay, let me clean that up just a little bit. So this is equal to a minus and equal to a minus. Okay. All right, so now that I have these deviations, okay, what I need to do is I need to square them, okay, meaning I take what I had in this step and I square it. So I have my data minus my mean. Remember, that's these values here, and then I'm going to square them. All right, so squaring means taking that number times itself. So I either can write it 13.6 squared equals whatever, and that ends up being 184.90. 6.96, or I can just 22.3 times 22.3, because remember, squaring only means multiplying that number by itself, and that gives me 497.29. So let me write it, let me write it this way. So that's 22.3 squared is 497.29. Then a minus 13.5 squared, remember a minus times a minus is a plus, so we still end up with a positive number, 182.25. Okay. When you're doing this, all of your numbers should be a positive number. So then I take a minus 26.2, square that, and that gives me 686.44. And then I take 7.1 squared, and that's 50.41. And then I take minus 3.3, and that's 1089. Okay. So now I have them all squared. Okay, I have to add them all up, right? So I'm going to get a total here. And that total is 1612.24. Okay, so now once I've done that step, if you recall, I'm going to take, if you're looking at that chart. Now remember, I didn't memorize the formula. There is a formula for standard deviation, and you'll see what that formula looks like when you actually take business statistics. But even when you're looking at that formula, you're going to be working off, working through the steps in a chart format like this. Okay, it has a formula. You don't need to memorize the formula, but what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to look at the illustration in the textbook and follow it. Okay, and that's all I'm doing right now is I am looking at the illustration, which you saw in the theory video, which is in your textbook, and I am just following through the steps. So I don't have to memorize the formula for standard deviation unless I'm being asked to repeat it, and then I could just look it up in the book, but I'm just following the steps, okay? So I take my 1612.24, and remember, now you're going to divide it by n minus 1. Well, what is n? Okay, how much is n? Well, n is the 6. So 6 minus 1 means 5. It gives us 5. So I have 1612.24, and I'm dividing that by 5. And that gives me 300 and, oops, let me write that over here. That's giving me 322.448. Now, our final step is we take that 322.448 and we take the square root of it. And the way you do the square root on your basic calculator is you just punch in the 322.448 and then you hit the square root key. And when you do that, you end up with a standard deviation of 17.96 as your standard deviation. Okay? So, with that said, this here I realize, there's a lot of information on this particular slide, and I went through it step by step. Definitely go back and re-watch this, but also watch the theory video, all right? Because in the theory videos, I go over the problem where I have data set A and data set B, and I do the exact same steps, okay? So yeah, it's just nothing but math. I mean, you're adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. All it is just knowing what to do when, okay? It's understanding the process. So you can just, this is one of those times where I'm going to say, just follow step by step the process, and you should end up with a standard deviation, okay? So with that said, if you're not getting it, watch the theory videos again, rewatch this video, and if you still have any additional questions, feel free to contact an instructor. But remember, get this down pat, because you're going to see this again in future subjects, okay? So I'm going to stop here and pick up and do the next two problems in the next video.